If you're in the process of planting a church, there are a lot of questions that you should be able to answer and things that you should work through in order to plant a healthy church. And so today on Practical Church Planting, we're going to give you 6 specific questions that every church planter should be able to answer.
Well, thanks for joining us again today on Practical Church Planting. We're going to be giving you 6 questions that every church planter should be able to answer.
Yes, so we talked to a lot of church planters and a lot of the common themes, and so these are some things that if you have an answer for them ahead of time, that you won't have to be trying to figure it out in the moment, and you'll look prepared. Before we get into that real quick, this episode of Practical Church Planting is brought to you by Faith Street. Faith Street, here's their question for you. If you're a pastor and your community is scattered, if you're feeling worn out and frayed, and if you're wondering what church looks like in 2020 and beyond because of the pandemic, Faith Street is here to help. Faith Street is a new kind of mobile app for churches focused on discipleship and community, not just communications. It strengthens people's commitment to the church and each other. It builds community by prompting prayer, generosity, reflection, fellowship, and teaching as daily practices, so it's a little bit different than its typical church app. Faith Street is led by a team with roots in the Assemblies of God, Vineyard, PCA, Anglican, and non-denominational worlds, and it's built by leaders and for leaders. So if you are interested in learning more about Faith Street, you can go to faithstreet.com/practical, because Practical Church Planting listeners can receive 20% off if you go to faithstreet.com/practical. So with that, here are 6 questions every church planter should be able to answer. The questions that you'll get a lot, that I talk to a lot, and be able to answer these ahead of time. We'll just be good to go. Here's the first one. Who is my tribe? This is important because a lot of times we feel led to plant a church and we want to know who we're going to do it with or what are the next steps. And doing it by yourself is probably one of the worst decisions you can make. And part of the reason planters often do this by themselves is because they want to plant tomorrow and they want to get started and they maybe don't want to be told no, or you just don't have anyone that you're connected with and you don't know the process of that and it seems long and you're not really quite sure who to talk to, so you just kind of I'll figure it out as I go. You should definitely be able to answer this before you start all of the launch stuff. And if you're in the launch stuff, I would start working on this right now. Whether it's a network or denomination or churches or ascending church or something, but having people that you're doing ministry with, we say this a lot. A lot of times we look at networks, for example, and things that you need to get through an assessment so you can plant a church, and we forget that church planting is not just about the first week; it's about the whole time. So you need relationships, and accountability, and encouragement. And so, what network are you going to be part of, or denomination, or church sending? Sometimes planters will talk about how they just don't know anybody or they don't have anybody. That is not a good answer if you want health for the long term. So you need to know who you are running with, and you need to get that figured out as soon as possible.
Yeah, we have a number of episodes on the importance of joining a denomination or a network. And so I encourage you to go back and listen if this is a question that you're unsure about or unsure why. But it's just, I don't know. I feel like this is something that we would give this advice to most people, but I think sometimes harder to take for ourselves is that you need to not do this alone. I think any of us would advise maybe a younger church planter or someone who's a little further back in the process than we are, that you need to not do this alone. But I think that a lot of times we can feel like that we're kind of exempt from it without actually saying that. But I think it especially helps for people who are younger to be able to give them some credibility, and also give you a community of people that you can talk to and ask questions of. And you're not always going to have that in your local church, in your local context. So having people that have more experience than you can answer questions and just can kind of walk through this entire journey with you is really helpful.
And here, if you're wondering who do I go or how do I find people, Acts 29, ARC, Stadia, Google church plant networks in your region, denominations. And what you can do is literally fill out a contact form and just have a conversation. It's not like you're applying to the network or anything like that, but talk to people, what it's like, what training they offer, what their network's like. You can reach out to we'll talk about this later, but you can reach out to a lot of local pastors. And with Zoom and phone calls, they don't even have to be local, and just be here's who I am. I'm interested in planting a church. I'd love for an hour of your time if I could just learn about your journey in ministry. You'll learn a lot of things from them. Make sure you come with questions. So don't just like talk on the phone for them with forever, like specific things you want to ask. And you might have connections. You might strike up something, but reach out. Not everyone will respond, but some will.
Yeah.
But find who you're planting with or working with as soon as possible, because it seems like a thing that we'll figure it out on our own. And especially this is just the reality of the situation. In our highly individualistic Western culture, that's the culture we live in, and so we can adapt that. We can kind of seem like, well, we'll just figure it out. I mean, after all, it's just going to be like this small church or this Bible study that we're starting. I don't need all this outside support and whatever. If you want long-term health, you will. If you want to be beyond 15 people, which if 15-person house church is all you want to do, that's totally fine. That's probably not your goal if you're listening to this, and so you need to be able to answer, who is my tribe, and like solidly, not just, I've talked to some people and I might try this. You've got to figure that out if you want long-term health.
Yeah, and there is no shortage of networks, denominations, whatever. If you don't know who to join, like there is one that fits your kind of theological persuasion.
Absolutely
there is. Like, I think we all want to think that we're doing like the most unique thing, and that no one is like the church that we want to plant, but it's just not true. Like there's churches that have done what we do, and have done obviously a million times over. And whatever you think, if you think you have like a different way to do it, there are churches that have done it, and so being able to talk to them is really going to be helpful.
Yep. So you got to be able to answer the question, who is my tribe? Who am I running with? Second question you should be able to answer is, what is my fundraising plan? And not just we want to raise money, but do I actually know, like, do I have a budget that I've created? And it's not going to be 100% accurate, but at least demonstrates that you've thought through some things.
Yeah.
So for example, something we talk about often is, are you going to be bivocational or full-time? Assuming that I'm going to work and then eventually the church will grow and then I'll have make enough money that I don't need to be bivocational. That's not a plan. Like, which do you want to be?
Yeah.
And there's pros and cons to both. And like, come up with a plan to do it. If you want to be full-time, how much money do you need to raise? I think it's episode 169 on this one, I'm pretty sure. It's a conversation I have with Jordan Penley. He's the best fundraiser that I know.
Yep.
One of our most downloaded episodes. So listen to that if you want to figure out a fundraising plan. But like, what do you want to do? What is the budget going to look like? And you need to have an answer for the next like 6 to 12 months. It's not going to be 100% accurate, but if you don't have a plan, you can't get to where you're going. And if you're not sure what's going to happen financially, if you want people to give, like, it doesn't make any sense. And so what is your financial plan, your fundraising plan? What are the goals that you want to hit, and what are the markers that you need to be at to make sure things are on the right track?
Yeah, when we, if you listen to the podcast, we recently sent out our first church plant a few months ago. They just launched. But in doing that, obviously, we had to help him make a budget fundraising plan. He had raised support for himself for his salary for a long time, but now it is completely switched to raising support or fundraising for the actual church. And so it was helpful to have that stuff in place, because I know when he was getting close to launch, like, they were having to purchase a ton of stuff, for outfitting their space and production, things like that. And I remember him calling me and basically saying, like, this is what things are costing. Are we going to go under? Like, he had made it, but he hadn't really like dug into it, and he was really worried. But it was real simple to just pull up the budget and be like, no, this is what we plan to spend, and this is what we plan to take in. And if we look at what we've taken in so far, it looks like we're on track for that. So spend it. I mean, get what you need to get. But if we weren't tracking things well, if we didn't have a plan of where money was going to be coming from, like he had a plan of churches to raise money from, and that he had already done, then we would have both been saying the same thing of, should we or shouldn't we? It's just been a guess. And that's why I feel like a lot of church planners can land themselves of, I'm not sure if I should spend this money. Maybe I should, maybe I shouldn't, or I don't know where money's going to come from. But if you have this plan and know where your money's going to come from, and a plan of how to get to where you want to be, then you'll be able to do the things you want to do.
You want to take all the guesswork out of it. I mean, we have a thing right now where I want to buy something for our church.
Yes, we sure do.
And if you're watching this on the YouTube, to my left, right here on our wall, I want to do something to it, and the elders, I'm the only one that wants to do it right now. I keep being told no.
Not the only one that wants to do it.
Well,
the only one who wants to do it immediately.
Right.
Yes.
But it's not like an emotional, it's like, here's the money, and can we do it or can we not?
Yeah.
And so this is work, like finding a tribe, assessment, getting connected, fundraising plan, a budget, all that sort of stuff. You might be like, well, I just want to preach the gospel and start a Bible study, and that's totally fine. But if you want... And I'm pro all different types of churches. I get this is not how they did it in the first century.
Sure.
But they didn't. But we don't live in the first century, and they didn't. Everything's just different, and there's different strengths and weaknesses. And so, like in an American context, if you want long-term health and if you want to grow a church over 100 people, this stuff is just foundational. You're not just going to preach the gospel and 150 people are going to show up and stick. That's not going to happen.
Yeah.
Very few people are just talented enough to do that. With this. So it takes, the biggest thing that I have seen is that it takes more work on the front end that church planters often want to do, but the ones that want to do it, their health and their success rate is a lot higher, and they get to go a lot faster when it's time to start, as opposed to just trying to slowly figure everything out as they go.
Yeah, and a fundraising plan isn't just hopefully we'll raise X amount of dollars, but it's how are we going to raise that money? So like if you're church planting, it's potentially looking at the churches that hopefully you have relationships with, and looking at how much do we want to raise from churches, or how much we can based on once we launch or pre-launch what giving should be. But I think being as detailed as possible is really going to help, because if you just say we want to raise, we're going to plant a church and we want to raise a couple $100,000, that means nothing unless you have a plan of how to do it. And so having a plan of how to raise that money, regardless of where from, is really going to, it's going to get you
who
where
am I
going to
talk to? What are my markers? So episode 169.
Yes.
Also, we talk about this on our practical and growing the launch team course. So practicalplanting.com/launch. If you're 2 years out or less from launching, I know we made it, and so we sell it, but it's just like all of this super practical advice. That's what I would go. You can get more information about that on the course. So that's number 2. Number 3, you should answer this question and this one is the first 2 seem kind of work. The second one, this third one is fun.
Yeah.
But it's something that people often don't think about, and that is, answer this question: what would I want the church to realistically, 500 people are not going to be in your church in 3 years.
Right.
Most likely. What would I want the church to realistically look like in 3 years? And this will get you off the mindset of, I'm just going to start a Bible study and it's just going to grow. How many people? I mean, if you want to see 100 to 150 people in 3 years, which is possible if you are set up a way to handle it, you're going to have things like a budget and an on-ramp for serving and membership or partnership and groups. Now, you do not have to have all of this day one.
Yeah.
Absolutely do not need to have everything like that day one. But it's not going to magically appear. So what size and place and what would I want the church like? What realistically, like, what are some of the things, markers I would love our church to see in 3 years, and then start to work backwards.
Yeah.
So the launch phase, what would be good to have? Year 1, year 2, and then you can actually, again, you can start making plans and goals and not just, I hope that it happens. So 3 years from now, what do you want to have happen? And I would say this, I know some, oftentimes church planters will be like, well, I don't want to have like a really big church. I don't want to have 1,000 people or 5. That's not going to happen for you. Like that just, with social media and online, it makes it look like that's normal. That's the average church is less than, it was like 80 people, something like that in America or something like that. The majority, or no, not average. Less than 100 people is like, I forget the percentage, 75, 80% of all churches. Yeah. So you're not going to, you don't have to be, do not worry about getting too big.
Right.
That statistically likely will not happen. It might happen for some people, but it probably will not happen for you. Yeah. And so don't worry about that, but worry about where do I want to get to, and actually making a plan. What I want the church to realistically look like in 3 years can actually help you figure out what you need to start working on. Yeah,
that's good. And I think realistically is the key word, because I think you can go one of two ways. You can either say, I really don't want a big church, and assuming that it's going to accidentally happen without you meaning to, or you can say that I really want a big church and I want to be at this 500 people in 3 years. And I think having big goals is good. I think it's good to like dream big and have, big goals both in church and in personal life and things like that. But also it's important to be realistic. So if someone came to me and said that, I don't know that I would necessarily say that smack them down and say that shouldn't be your goal, but you need a really detailed plan of how to do it.
Yeah.
It's happened. It's extremely unlikely. And I would say if you don't have relationships, like close relationships in your tribe and things with churches that have done something similar, it's almost guaranteed to not happen because you don't know what that actually looks like. But regardless of what your goal is, you're going to have a detailed plan of how to get there. So if your goal is a little, twice as much as we are now, if you're pre-launch and you want to, double your launch team or maybe, then that's pretty easy goal to hit, I would say, if you're pre-launch. But if you want to have these big goals, I think it's okay, but you need to have a plan of how to get there, but also be realistic that if I don't have an idea of how I'm going to get to this big number, it's just not going to happen. And so I need to so I don't even know that I would say I need to adjust my planning and figure out how to get there, but I think you just need to adjust your goal and see what's realistic for you and your context and your area.
Yeah, funny side note about like churches that launch and like get really big really quickly. There's typically a couple of common denominators. One, the lead pastors typically like in their 40s, typically, or they have experience. But the church is also connected and sent, and they've got a network. Like
sure, totally, yeah.
if you look at churches that grow really quickly, and I'm pro, do it if you can. There are people that are not. This is not their first rodeo.
Yeah.
And they're connected. They have support. They've got churches. Of course, where you live matters. If you're in a suburban context, that's outside of a big city, you're going to grow probably a lot faster than a rural or an urban context.
Yeah,
so like
of
that.
course.
But it's just like they have a plan, and it's not like they're trying to figure it out. So all that to say, what do I want realistically the church to look like in 3 years? What would it take to get there and start working on that? And you'll realize that it's not just preaching the Bible, which is great. But if you want to, again, reach more people, you're going to have some systems and structures to do that in a healthy way, where not only will people come, but they'll also stick.
Yeah, that's good.
Let's see, number 4, what is my spouse going to end up doing? Now, again, in the early stages, it's fine. I mean, everyone's sacrificing and doing stuff, so I'm not one of those people that's like, your spouse, like I've talked to people that's like, your spouse shouldn't be doing this, or if she doesn't want to do kids ministry, she shouldn't be in it at all. And it's like, okay, maybe if that works out, that's fine. Your spouse probably is going to have to sacrifice. Well, it is in the beginning, and that's fine. But you need to have a plan and a goal of what do they end up wanting to do, and when can we get there? I would recommend within 6 months from launch, your spouse should be not doing the things that they don't want to be doing for long term.
Right.
I remember when I was at my assessment, they were like, if you're going to burn someone out, you should burn out a volunteer before you burn out your wife, because you can get another volunteer, but you're not going to get another wife.
Yeah.
And your spouse is your wife's only husband. And obviously you don't want to burn out anybody.
Yeah.
But because your spouse is always there and is supportive, it can be easy to. Now, this might seem unfair to people, although most people don't think about it and they don't care.
Yeah,
A lot of times it's just in your own head. But that's okay. It's okay if it's unfair, because your spouse also deals with a lot of stuff that people don't see. So like for us, Christina started with the kids ministry. I mean, we were really fortunate, so that also helps. But like Brian and Brittany came, and so Brittany took that over. But our plan was never to have Christina do it long term. So I don't know what we would have done if we didn't have that. We would have figured something out.
Yeah.
Even, this is a side note, but like even in our community group, we're even a little bit selective. Like if we have an open slot in our group and Christina doesn't feel like she has a lot of friends in the group, then we won't just let anybody join, because she meets with people. She already does a lot of stuff. It's weekly. Like she needs to have a space, and you do too as a leader. You need to have a space that you enjoy. And so it's not like everybody in your group, for example, you're going to love, but you should have at least a friend or two that you're glad that they're there, and you don't feel like you have to train and teach people all the time, because you also need community as well. And so what do you want your spouse to look like? Talk about it, and then set like realistic deadlines. So it's okay in the beginning if it doesn't look what you want, but there needs to be a deadline of when we get however many months or whatever, we're going to stop this, we're going to change it, and we're just going to have to figure out what we're going to do.
Yeah, I think it's good, and I think it's good to have. I think this will be different for every person.
Yep.
I mean, there are people who have their spouse be in full-time ministry with them because that's the plan of what they want to do, and that's fine. But it's not fine if that's not what they want to do, like you're saying. So I think having these honest conversations in the very beginning really helps. And I think both of you should be realistic in the sense that can change over time. Pre-launch, before anything's like happened, it's very easy to have an idea of what I want this to look like. But then once you get into it, you might have a spouse that says, I really want to be in this full time with you. And then getting into it, you may look a few months after launch and realize this was way more taxing than I thought, or just not as enjoyable as I thought, which is fine. And when you look at scaling back, so I think you need to have these honest conversations up front, but then also be continually revisiting, because I think I think you'd be doing your spouse a disservice to kind of. I think it can be easy for guys, if we're talking to guys, that it can be easy for a guy to make decisions for his wife based off things in the past without like talking things through now, if that makes sense.
And just like, the church needs this, and she wants the church to do well, so I'm just going to tell her she's going to do this.
Yeah, exactly. And we could be going off things like a conversation we had a year ago and assuming that things are still that way and trying to make things happen, when in reality, if you don't have these follow-up conversations with your spouse, they might be thinking, I want things to be a different way, but if you're not communicating. So really just communicate with your spouse. But be realistic in what they're doing and ask. And there doesn't need to be a big theological reason behind it. There doesn't need to be like a big spiritual reason. It's like, if she don't like kids ministry, or she don't like whatever,
it's like
social
kids
media
ministry
or
worship team.
Or
That's
worship,
kind of like the two things.
Yeah, just because she can sing doesn't mean she wants to. I mean, so it's figure out what she wants to do and make it happen. 6 months, I think, is a good time frame.
And your spouse probably won't tell you because they'll feel bad.
Yeah,
like they'll want it. So you need to How are you doing? What do you want to do? Let's make a plan to get there so that you actually enjoy this thing too, because it is your church as well. And
Yeah.
so you should hopefully want to be here.
And I will say it's on you to figure out what the replacement, so to speak, is. In other words, if she's doing more than she wants to, it's not on her to figure out. Like I think we talk a lot with leaders how like you should like replace yourself or replicate yourself. Train up leaders so that they could replace you. But I don't think that's your spouse's responsibility. So in other words, I think that you need to figure out what the replacement plan is for them if they want to be replaced, and not just let them figure it out, because they're already potentially doing a job they don't necessarily want to do. Then add on that, try finding someone else to replace it. That's a lot to ask.
Yep.
So.
Yep. So what I'm going to end up doing, have those conversations. Don't just assume, because then it'll lead to a lot of problems down the road. Number 5, can I name 10 pastors in my community? Not that you have to be like friends with them and hang out with them all the time, but do you know any other pastors in your community? Especially if you're new or if you've been there for a while. If you can't, well, there's an easy solution. It's just email them, call them, say, hey, can I take you out to lunch or coffee? Ask them questions, bring questions, and just get to know them. Yep. This is also one of the most disarming things you could do. Different contexts are different. I know particularly in like rural contexts where it can feel like church planting is stealing, or we already have churches, what are you doing here? People can be intimidated, or if you're a new guy and you're younger, someone who's been there for a while could have like a lot of suspect motives, or what are you doing? Your style's different, you dress different. The most disarming thing you could do is just say, hey, I'd love to get to know you. And then they'll realize, that you're not about trying to take things away from them. Yeah. You have a lot to learn from them. They have some stuff to learn from you as well. And just assuming, and I would say this, like assuming nobody wants to talk to me and assuming, that everyone's going to view our church bad, that's not what we're supposed to do. Yeah. Like as followers of Jesus, it's not what we're supposed to do. And this is an opportunity to teach people. So just because you're in an area that people might look at church planting as like a threat or competition, that is a growing opportunity to help people learn. So talk to people, let them know, ask the pastors if you could share, especially if the pastor doesn't view it that way, but their people might. Well, if their pastor tells their people, hey, this is what this church plant thing is, here's why we're excited about it, they're actually going to preach on a Sunday, or we're going to share. And here's the thing, like most people get afraid that their people are going to leave their church. I actually am not afraid about that at all. Yeah. I mean, partially it's because we're just really mission focused, but like, if people enjoy the community and they're growing, they're going to stay. Yeah. Like, because they don't. Now, some of them might leave out of mission, which is good. But if you're worried like everyone's going to leave your church, well, then because of church planting, well, that's because your church has problems. Yeah. But talk to them, get to know them. Just be able to name them. It'll help you refrain things from saying things like, there's no other churches like us in the area. Because there's not. There are. There are. There might not be exactly like you, but I have found a lot of times when people say there's no churches like us, they don't just mean stylistically. They even mean like theologically or missionally. Now, it might be an older congregation, and so them being on mission looks different than yours, but they still have the same heartbeat. It just looks different. And so I would say you have to be able to but to name them and actually have talked to them. And it'll be helpful for you, for them. They won't view you as a threat. They'll probably here's the thing. If you want to grow your launch team, practicalplanting.com/launch, buy the course. I guarantee you, here's the thing. I guarantee you is that if $149 is the cost, if you could double your launch team, would you spend $149? Oh, yeah. This will double your launch team. They just will. Probably more than that. Yeah. But anyway, if you want to grow your launch team, buy the course. Also talk to pastors, because they will tell their people about it if they like what's happening, and you will probably get some people that you would not have otherwise. So can you name 10 pastors in your area? That's a good question to answer.
It's such a common thing that we hear with churches of a few weeks ago in Practical Church Planting Facebook group, join it if you haven't. Dylan asked something along the lines of who's looking to plant a church, who wants to plant a church and looking for residency or something along those lines. Yeah. And every response was churches saying, we would like a resident, It was like, so every church wants to know church planters. Like, even if they're not the ones sending them out, every church wants a relationship with church planters in their area, but we just don't have, there's way more, there's not nearly enough church planters to fill the need, so to speak. Yeah. Like every time we talk to churches in the area, and like Adam, who we just sent out, every church planter every church that he talked to was pretty much willing to speak with him for the most part. From what I can remember.
He went to a smaller, not rural, but a smaller town where there hasn't been a church plant who knows how long. So they're excited.
Yeah, totally. Like people want to be involved in church planting for, speaking in generalities. For the most part, churches want to be involved in church planting, but don't have a way to do it or don't know anyone who's doing it. And so just being able to have that relationship with you, I think more churches than we would think would be excited about that. Yeah. And I think the fear of like churches looking at competition and stuff like that, there are some that may, but that's really, I think, more likely to be in your own head than in reality.
Yeah, there's definitely some that may, but you will, if you reach out to all the churches in your area, you will find churches that actually are excited about what you're doing.
Absolutely.
And especially if you don't have a lot of connections, this is a great way to get to know some people, maybe get an older pastor mentor that's really excited about it. But you should be able to answer 10 pastors in your community. It'll be good for those churches, and it'll be really good for you. It'll even be good for your launch team. So I would recommend do that. And then last but not least, number 6, the question that you will get asked, so you might as well come up with a good answer, is why are you planting where you're planting? And we've talked about this a little in other episodes. You don't have to have a super hyper spiritual answer to this.
Yeah.
Just tell people, and they'll be like, okay. I grew up in the area, and I'm really passionate about it, and it changed my, and I care about these people, and whatever. And you can, and we talk about like statistics are fine, and that's what we feel like. We feel like we have to justify, like here's how unchurched it is, and blah, blah, blah. Nobody cares. I mean, you can share some, but if you can share a story or two of someone that impacted you in the area, or someone that you want to impact in the area, or something that's going on, but have an answer, and then don't apologize for it. Don't feel like you need to give 13 facts and 17 reasons why this is the place that you have to plant among all other places. At the end of the day, and we talked about this on the episode, we're called to love God and love people. You can do that in or out of ministry, in any job, in any location. It doesn't really matter where you plant a church. I'll just tell you, like it doesn't. Go somewhere where you're passionate about, pray about it, talk to people, but just have a quick answer and just let that be the answer, and don't feel like you have to justify it. Because honestly, people aren't looking for like a big answer. We feel like they are, but they just want to know. And if you can answer that in like 3 minutes or less, especially if they live in the area, there's a lot higher chance they might join your team. So.
That's good. I saw this question asked in a church planting Facebook group the other day. It was basically saying, my wife and I have like answered the call to plant a church. How do you decide where to plant? And I was encouraged that a lot of the answers, mine included, were just like, where do you live? Where are you from? Start there. Like, not that say you have to be there, but go somewhere you're familiar with. And and I think this question, like, I think that the answer to this question is really easy if it's where you're from. Because if someone asks you why you're planting here and you say, hey, born and raised here, I don't think you even need any follow-up to that. If you're doing like the whole like parachute planting thing where you're going to like a completely different place, then I think it's a little more important if you're showing up out of nowhere saying, this is why I'm planting here. I do think you should have a reason, not necessarily a statistical reason, but just a reason. Like why? And I mean, you should already know this. Like, why are you planting there? Like, is your church sending a specific, or your sending church want to plant in this area, or do you just always wanted to visit there? Whatever. I mean, you should have an answer to this, but people are going to ask, and it's okay to not, have it be this vision that you got from God, or this big like life-changing thing that happened that made you want to be here. But if you just love a community and think that a church is needed there, that's a good answer.
Yeah, I would just encourage this. If you can answer, because if you answer for a long period of time, people are going to forget even what they asked you. 3 minutes or less, just give a solid answer, 3 minutes or less. You can share a statistic or two if you want, but that's not what people care about. And just use that every time, and then don't apologize for it. Don't keep talking. That'll just be really helpful for you if you can answer why you're planting where you're planting, and don't feel like it needs to be super hyper spiritual, because it doesn't.
It doesn't. Every place needs churches. Like there's no place I think any of us would say, like as church planters, that it is over churched and the population's got enough churches and they're good. Like every place needs churches.
And a lot of places that have tons of churches, like how many of them are vibrant?
True.
In giving life and talking about Jesus and making a difference in the community. So honestly, the number of churches is completely irrelevant because it doesn't necessarily mean that they're healthy and all that sort of thing. So those are 6 questions every church planter should be able to answer. Like we said in this episode, if you're getting ready to launch in that phase, practicalplanting.com/launch. Check out the course. We just think it'd be really good for you. We're also in the Facebook group, so if you need community, go to Facebook and Practical Church Planting. You'll find the group there. We're getting close to 1,000 people, so that's exciting.
Come on, get us over that mark.
And then lastly, faithstreet.com/practical. If you're looking for an online, or if you're looking for an app to help you engage the people in your church better, it's not just a normal church app, it's actually more. faithstreet.com/practical to get the discount, or just to reach out to them with any questions you may have. And thanks for listening. We'll be with you next time on Practical Church Planting.